I'm joined by our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert.
Good morning.
Good morning. So this all comes amid increasingly fiery rhetoric from the United States, Israel, and Iran, even though people say they want the deal to be revived.
Yeah, let me return to that shredded art metaphor. Donald Trump, right, shredded the Iran nuclear deal back in 2018. And ironically, to many of the players around it, it's become more valuable. The stakes of getting it back, everyone wants it back, even though it was shredded, torn up. The question right now is this. The rhetoric is still very sharp on both sides. Is it a lot of posturing? Sure it is. You have, on the one hand, Iran, basically in recent days, saying that it's open to the prospect of coming back to the table, perhaps as soon as early November. At the same time, last Sunday, the inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency say they were denied access to a nuclear site, an Iranian nuclear site near Tehran. So Iran, why? Why is it posturing? Well, it basically says, yeah, it's ready to return in theory to the table, but it wants guarantees that what Donald Trump did, remember, shredding up, ditching the deal, that will not happen again. It wants guarantees that if it comes back to the table onto a new deal, a new and improved deal, it will not simply be ripped up at the whim and caprice of a new American president. On the other hand, the Biden administration is tacking very closely right now to its Israeli ally, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, met yesterday with Israel. Now, the official version is that Joe Biden's administration has wanted to return to the deal, and it wants Iran to come back to negotiation table soon. But as the prospect of Iran returning to negotiate the same deal has become more distant, the U.S. has sort of approached more the Israeli, which is the very extremely belligerent, bellicose rhetoric of Israel, basically all but calling for military options against Iran, which it sees as an existential threat. And the U.S. basically now saying, tacking to that line, obviously not using the same war rhetoric, military rhetoric as Israel, but basically saying, look, if Iran, despite all these diplomatic efforts, fails to come back to the table to open up what we see as good faith negotiations on this deal, all options are on the table, meaning the U.S. isn't ruling out sanctions, and perhaps, as Israel perhaps would most like to see, the military option. So you could see it's rhetoric, right? The both sides posturing. It doesn't mean that they each have interest in their own way, despite the hard line right now out of Iran, despite the Israel-U.S. alignment on the other hand. There is an interest on both sides in finding a way to come back, despite that gap in their rhetoric right now.
And there is perhaps a middle ground between the gap and those two players' rhetoric. That's the European Union. What are they hoping to do about all of this?
Europe's sort of caught in the middle here, right? Because obviously the European powers, when Enrique Mora, who is the EU envoy, when he goes to Tehran today and sits down with the new Iranian negotiating team, because let's remember there's a new team there led by a man who's really a hardliner in many respects, who's replaced the old team. They will be basically sending a message that is a collective message mainly of France, of Germany, and Great Britain, basically saying that window is closing. Hey, Iran, you want to get the U.S. back at the table? You want them to rejoin the talks? Well, your window to have that happen is really closing fast. You say these sanctions are crippling your country. You want to come back to the table? Do so now. They're calling this a critical moment. But as we know, the obstacle here for Iran, and they are playing to a hard-line, conservative, also clerical factions within Iran, hard-line factions within Iran. They can't make it seem as if they're just caving, conceding to the West and to the American point of view and being held hostage by the whims, the nuclear whims of the West. So they don't want to be dictated to. It's a very fine balance for Iran. How do they find a way back to that table without looking in any way, shape, or form like they are caving to some Western diktat?
All right, Doug, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there, but we will be following that as it evolves. Thank you very much, Douglas Herbert, our international affairs commentator, with that analysis.